a sheet from the back, so we can get you guys one. All right, everybody's got one? Today we're going to be talking about this topic, worship through obedience. And as I wrote up this sheet and sent it over to Brace, I just said, this is a little bit more weird than I thought it would be. I don't think I've ever really looked at it in a perspective like this before. I think there's maybe a couple challenging things or some things that are just, I don't know, weird to me, but I'm excited to have a discussion to see kind of where everybody else is at with this and to kind of understand how we can worship God and prioritize God through what He's commanded of us and how we respond to those commands. So, reading there at the top for our focus for Sunday, today we're going to be looking at this idea that worshiping God through obedience invites us to see our daily choices as acts of devotion, not just duties to fulfill. Instead of viewing obedience as a list of rules, this perspective frames it as a heartfelt response to God's character, His love, His faithfulness, and His desire for our good. When we obey, we align our lives with His purposes, reflect His nature to the world, and express trust that His ways are better than our own. In this class, we'll explore how obedience becomes a form of worship that shapes our identity, deepens our relationship with God, and transforms the way we live. So, I know in earlier classes we've talked about, how we take on the identity of God and, having a relationship with Him and truly acting out a life that worships God. And we're going to touch on that more throughout this lesson as well. But I guess the initial question I want to ask this morning and get your guys' thoughts on is, when you hear this idea of worship through obedience, what comes to your mind? Or what is, something that you've experienced in your life or things you've heard in teachings? What comes to your mind? And let's discuss this a little bit to kind of introduce the topic. What does worship through obedience look like to you? Joy, go ahead.
In my past, it has always been a checklist. Always.
Okay, and what does that checklist look like? Is it just a list of things, we got to do these things because...
You got to do these things, and if you are not on the level that I am,
yeah,
telling you to do these things, you're going to hell.
Okay. Pretty intense right there. But I think that's an experience people can have. I've seen that a little bit through, our perspective sometimes on what we feel that needs to be done kind of overrides what God actually wants us to do and affects the way that we, kind of treat people in that way. What else? Go ahead, Margaret.
The first thing before we can worship through obedience, we have to know what God requires.
Okay.
Or what He has told us to do, asked us to do.
Absolutely.
So if you don't know what obedience is, or what you need to obey, then you can't possibly worship.
Yeah.
And then obviously the next step is to do what you have learned.
Yes. We'll reference a passage in this lesson talking about that very idea, that if we don't know, what God has said, if we haven't taken the time to understand it, then how are we to obey Him the proper way? Aaron?
When we tie this all the way back to the first lesson, where it talks about what is true worship, bowing down and honoring and setting beforehand. When we talked about this briefly last night, and you said something about this, I thought the first verse that came to mind is when Jesus told Peter, "If you love me, keep my commandments."
Yeah.
And that to me is also what worship through obedience is. If you truly love God and want to worship Him, back to the way we talked about in the first lesson, just that all-inspiring, know you're going to stand before Him, then, your obedience. I think worship through obedience is easier than worship through song.
Okay.
There's that secular song, I Can Only Imagine.
Yeah.
And, when you think about that, just being able to stand before the Almighty God, knowing that, I worship you through obeying and serving what He wants and putting less of yourself in that.
Yeah. And I can kind of relate to that. I understand, the idea of worshiping through obedience, kind of seeing an easier way through worship. But it goes back to what you were talking about through the first lesson, talking about, and also what Jesus said to Peter, if you love me. I think we've mentioned love quite a few times through this lesson series on how love, and especially our love, we understand the love of God, but do we understand what it takes on our part in the way that we love God? and how that plays into our worship. Because if we truly do have a love and passion for God, I think it's pretty normal to want to do what he says and want to please him and want to look up to him and say, hey, I want to do as you commanded. But I think that's a big part of it. Emily?
I think about, like, we're God's children, and whenever you see kids obeying your parents, you can tell, yeah, they love their parents, they respect their parents,
Yeah.
they honor their parents. It's kind of the same with God. When we obey him, we honor him, we worship him, we respect him and everything that he is and does.
Yeah, I think that's a big part in what this lesson is trying to portray, is that if we do what God says, if we show effort and if we show that it means something to us to want to obey what he says, obey his commands, there's a sense of honoring him. We want to honor him through what he's told us to do. We want to respect him and love him and show our obedience to him through what he shows us. And I think that's where the worship aspect comes into it. Because in my mind, I'm like, it's kind of hard to, how is just me obeying him worshiping him? But Emmy has a good point on saying, hey, if we truly love him and if we put it a point in our lives to obey him, that's showing honor to him. That's showing glory to him, saying, this means something to me. I want to lift your name on high and, continue to do what you said. Jim?
You talk about what do you think of when you think of worship? I think of order.
Okay.
God is a God of order and everything. He wants everything done a certain way. And blessed and happy are those who follow his order.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you got a point. I mean, God obviously has specific instructions, and we'll look at those. That he wants things a certain way, and we know that of God. He is God, but he has lined out things that this is the way he wants it. There's a certain order to it, and worshiping him, we would not be. It would be more of the opposite of worshiping if we, did not obey what he's asked us. So I think you got a point there too. Joy?
I don't know who wrote this first paragraph, but I was super impressed with it.
Okay.
Because it talks about why we love him. It's a result of, or a response to his love for us.
Yeah.
That's why we love him, and it has to do with his purposes.
Yeah.
His purpose is for our good.
Right.
It's not to harm us.
Yeah. The reason he set out different ways and the reason he, calls to us in different ways is all based on the way that he's first loved us. And once again, why we worship him, and why we love him. There's that, passage we all should know. We love because he first loved us. And Joy's got a point. I mean, that's what it's all about. So I appreciate you saying that. Anything else before we read some scripture here? Ashley?
I'm with you saying in this first paragraph that we align our lives with his purposes, and I think of intentionally positioning ourselves, under
Yeah.
his will.
Yeah.
Of course, surrender.
Right. Surrender. And that, it does refer back to it because our obedience to him is surrender to what he wants. It relates to the same thing, Brace.
And we do that for a number of reasons that we've talked about in this class. He obviously is greater than we are. He created us. He
Yep.
made us. But I think the deepest level of obedience stems from the fact that part of what Joy was saying from the opening paragraph, we recognize that he wants what's good for us.
Yep.
So we trust him even when we can't see the end and it doesn't make sense to us. We trust that God knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And that he only wants my best.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, that's the kind of obedience I long for from my kids.
Right.
It's not because I'm the parent or because I can punish them if they don't do what I want. It's because they trust that no matter how many mistakes I make in it, I'm trying to do what I think is in their best interest.
Yeah.
And so if they can learn that principle and they will follow what I instruct them to do on the basis of that, then that's the ultimate in obedience and the ultimate in love. It's
Yeah.
the ultimate in respect too.
I think so.
In relationship is that we get to that depth that we do what God wants no matter what, no matter when, especially when it doesn't make sense,
Right.
because we trust him.
Yep. And I think once we learn that specific point, once we learn that if we can trust that God does things for a reason, and we can trust in the love that he has for us, the way I view it is I think there's a difference between obeying because we have to and obeying because we want to. And if you can learn to trust God and form your relationship around His love, the reason that you'll reciprocate that love is because you understand why He does what He does. And you understand that He's done so much for you, and you understand that your relationship is much more than just, He made me so I have to do what He says to get by. And I think that's the wrong mindset. I think the right mindset is I obey what He does, especially in times where I don't think it's the right thing, or I don't know why I should obey Him in this way. But you learn to obey because you want to. It reciprocates that love, and I think it shows more honor and glory to God in that way as well. Ashley, do you have something else?
Yes, I saw something recently that said one of the most amazing things about God is that even a no answer from Him has His goodness written all over it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you can definitely learn that the hard way sometimes, because there's been a handful of times in my life where He's been, nah, and I'm like, why? And then you look back 6 months, however long later, and you're like, oh, that's why. That's why. And that trust continues to build, and you understand, man, even in times where He shut me out, I feel like He shut me out, it was actually, hey, I'm looking after you. Hey, this is not what I had planned for you. So it all comes together in that way, and it's super cool to see, Joy.
And I think that's a really good thing, like Bryce said, about in our explanations as parents to our kids. It is for your good, rather than
Yeah.
The kid thinking, I've got to do this so that I don't get in trouble.
Yeah.
It's not just so that I don't get in trouble.
Right. Yeah. You can relate that to what Bryce's example, because kids are like that. I remember being like that. Oh, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to do this because Dad's going to yell at me. And then as I got older, I realized I want, the way they raised me, I want to honor my parents in the way that they raised me, and I want to show respect and love to them in the way that I live under their household, and I'm under their rules, right? And there comes a time where you understand the importance of this is a situation that I'm blessed to be in. And that's the way we look at it here. We're in a situation that we're blessed to be God's people and blessed to have the life that He's given us. Chet, did you have your hand up?
To boil it down, is to put God first and ourselves second.
Yeah,
Third,
absolutely.
not to put ourselves above God.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's Joy hinted at that, but that's exactly right. God's here, we're here, and we are never going to be here. I mean, that's just never going to happen. And the more that we can see that this is the spot we're meant to be in, and God has all worthy and honor, and He's the only one deserving to be in this spot, it makes for a really good relationship, and it makes for a good life. So, Salem.
One of the things that you kind of brought up with the example of your parents is when you were younger, you kind of wanted to reject those rules a little
Yeah.
bit, but then as you matured, you understood why they were there.
Yep.
And I feel like that's the same thing in our relationship. So at first, some of the rules you're like, okay, this is weird.
Right.
What's happening?
Yeah.
Or why does he want this of me? And then as you mature, you can start to, and maybe you don't even understand the reasons, but you start to just kind of honor him in that way. And that makes our worship through obedience deeper.
It does.
As we mature.
It does. And it can grow a lot. And once again, our relationships with God, our spiritual journeys, the reason it's called a journey is because it is a journey. It starts with, as there's a starting point, and your starting point to ending point are going to look a lot different because there's so much growth and so much to learn and so much to understand at that time. And it's like any other relationship. I mean, when me and my wife first met, we didn't know a whole lot about each other. But now, I mean, we obviously know a lot more about each other, but that took time, and that took growth, and that took energy and all that kind of stuff. And Salem's right. It's the same with our relationship with God. And the more you give into it, the more understanding and the more comfort you have. And I think the more we can give to our worship to Him, and the more He can receive from that. So it's a journey. It takes growth. It takes all those kinds of things. Joy, did you have something else?
I was just going to say that the word that I wrote later on in the class was a process.
Yeah.
What you're talking about.
It's process.
It's not something that is like automatic, one and done type thing.
Yeah.
It is a process that grows.
Yeah.
And some people go at a faster pace than others.
And they do. And there's always, we talked about this a little bit at our men's study on Tuesday night, the idea that no matter how long you've been in this journey, there's always still room for growth. So even those of us who are older and who have been through this for a long time, been at this for a long time, and I see the ways that some people are still learning ways to grow and learning ways to I remember when I went to church with my grandparents right before I went to college, and then when I came back from college, I was at the church that they were at, and I was talking with my grandfather, and he was just talking about the ways he's grown in the past year in his spiritual life. And he's in his 70s, and he's been a Christian. He grew up in the church, as people say, but he grew up in the faith, and he's like, Zach, I just can't believe the ways that I can grow, and I see things a little differently. And it was really cool perspective to see, and it kind of taught me to always find ways to grow in your relationship with God, no matter what stage you're in, especially the beginning stage. But no matter how long you've known God and had a relationship with Him, there's always room to grow, to know more about Him and know more about the way He wants to see you. And yeah, anything else? Alrighty, that was a fantastic discussion. Joy, she's got more. Okay, no, you're good.
About the purposes, for our good, and his proof of that was the extent that he went to. He sacrificed his own only son
Yeah,
for us,
yeah,
to show us that it is for our good. It's not just a big dogmatic
right.
hammer. It's for your good. I'm even doing this for you.
Yeah. And what you're saying, and through what we've talked about, I mean, it's a struggle sometimes to really commit to that trust and that relationship. And it's hard to find proof. But what Joy said and everything we've talked about, there's so much when you engage in your relationship with God and fully dive in to know Him and understand Him, there's so much you can see that, like, okay, this is right. He did, he, like Joy said, He sent His Son to die for us. There's so much proof. There's so much proof of His love and the reason why we're created, the reason why we're here. There's so much to dive into to truly understand that. And that goes back to the process and journey that we have. So I think that's a great discussion. And through all of that, let's relate it back to our obedience. The process of growing our relationship with Him, I'll mention it one more time, can really enhance the way that we glorify Him through what He wants us to do. So, alrighty, let's move into some scripture because it's always good to back up what we say with what God has said before. So we'll open up our Bibles. Let's start in 1 Samuel chapter 15. And I'll read this verse. It's just one verse. 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 22. It says, "And Samuel said, Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings as sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen to the fat of rams." So, number one, does anybody know the context of this passage? And number two, what is this passage saying? Margaret?
Well, they were commanded to destroy this nation and to destroy all of it, and the people wanted to keep the animals for sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so Saul listened to them, and then God said, to obey is better sacrifice. To obey is better than to sacrifice. And what he was saying was that he did not obey him
Yeah.
by keeping the animals
Right.
for the sacrifice, even though they said it was for sacrifice.
Yep.
That he wanted their obedience more than he did the sacrifice.
Okay. Yep. What does this show us through, what do we learn through obedience through that? How can we relate to that? Emily?
I mean, it's basically just saying that God always knows best.
Yeah.
Mimi, whenever we were little, she would always go, God says it, you do it. No question, no if, and, but. No.
Yeah.
But if I keep them, then I can sacrifice to God. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
He said it, you do it. That's the rule.
Yeah. He's like, does He delight in that, or does He take delight in His children obeying Him and doing what they say? He's like giving them like, what's more important here? But He is raising the importance of, God really, if what He says goes, and there's no altercation, there's nothing we could put in. It's really what He says goes. Joy?
I really liked in that verse where it talks about, rather than it's just saying a checklist type thing, it's saying the voice of the Lord.
Yes.
That voice has got an indicator of purpose behind it.
Yes.
Love.
Yes.
And the second one is listening is not, to listen is, to me,
Right.
is more than soldier.
Yes.
Yes, we're soldiers, but are we like robots?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I think I really like the term voice there because a lot of the times we hear this idea of the words of the Lord, and that's a very common thing to hear. And obviously there's a lot of value in talking about the words of the Lord. But when it says the voice of the Lord, it gives them a characteristic that I think we can relate to pretty easily. Understanding when it says, as in obeying the voice of the Lord, behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. So that voice, I think, does have a lot of significance, understanding the characteristic of God speaking to us. I think a lot of the times we shy away from the idea of God speaking to us. But through the scriptures and through what we know, I mean, God has spoken to us. God does have a voice, and we can see, especially through the Old Testament, when God has called out to people, and it talks about God's voice, and I think there's significance in that. And if we can relate to that and understand that, I think Joy's got a good point there to kind of look at it in that perspective. Anything else, key takeaways from this verse here? Bryce.
I think part of the point is that obedience is not really obedience if it doesn't come from the heart.
Absolutely.
If there's not a heart involved in it, then it's not really obedience. And the truth is, you say, well, then what is it? If it follows the instruction, what is it? I mean, it may be that in this case, Saul thought he had a good idea.
Yeah.
Here's some good animals. Why kill them? Why slaughter them?
Okay, yeah.
We can offer them as a sacrifice. So sometimes our obedience, when it doesn't stem from our heart and trust in God, is just a matter of, well, what God wants happens to agree with what I think's the smart thing to do, so I'll just do that.
Yeah.
And that's not obedience.
No.
I mean, you're still the God on the throne. And that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah. This kind of worship is like any other worship we've talked about. Through prayer, through song, we talked about what it takes from our heart, from our souls, right? This is the same way. And Bryce has got a point. Worshiping God, and it goes back to wanting versus having to, right? And I think if our heart truly wants to obey God, that's where the want comes from. I want to worship God, and I want to obey God, and I want to glorify Him through obedience, and that stems from my heart and the way that I feel about Him, the way that, all those kinds of things. So I think that's a great point that we can see through this. Aaron?
And when you look down farther, Saul had this great idea. He saw these perfectly good animals.
Yeah.
And said, we should keep them. And then when Samuel says, you didn't do it, he said, but I did.
Yeah.
But I did utterly destroy them, and I kept this because it made sense.
Yeah.
And sometimes, if you fast forward that into our worship as obedience today, sometimes we can justify, well, yeah, but I did assemble.
Right.
It just happened to be on the lake with a couple friends, but I did do this. But I did. And we can sometimes, you see in this, Saul was justifying what his action was.
Yeah.
But I said, but I really did it. And then I love when Samuel says, be quiet, and let me tell you what I saw.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a point in that, though. I mean, how many times, we can relate that to ourselves today. How many times do we try to justify our actions just to make us feel a little bit better about ourselves? How many times do we say, oh, I did that. Brace, go ahead.
I think the thing that I've taken from this study so far that I think is the most important point that's been impressed on my mind is worship is always a response. If worship is just an action and not a response to the way I view God,
Yep.
then it's not the kind of worship He really wants to be seeking.
Yeah.
So worship is supposed to be a response. Obedience is supposed to be a response, and that's part of the point of this passage is if you're not sacrificing animals because you're responding to your trust in me and listening to my voice, then it's not what I want.
Yeah.
So it is always a response.
Yep. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And what does response take? Response takes thought and care. And when you're responding to something, especially as important as this, when we have to respond to important matters, what do we usually take time, we take effort, we take serious consideration. In any general response, it's not something we're just willy-nilly throwing out there. And if we are, it's not the right way to respond. So I think Brace has a phenomenal point there. Joy?
I think that by him using the word heart, it involves some emotion there.
Okay.
It's not all emotion because it is obedience, but the response, the purpose.
Yeah.
Those kind of things have to do with, they deal with emotion
Yeah.
Because that and emotion are what the world say, the world's all full of just that emotion, it's not about the law. And, it's a way of trying to get out of obedience by saying, it's kind of like taking a pass.
Okay.
If there's any emotion or any grace involved, then you're trying to take a pass on
Yeah.
obedience.
Well, I, for one, believe that God talks a lot about emotion and grace throughout the scriptures. So I have no problem talking about that. But I think you're right. And I think we've talked about emotion and, talking about coming from our heart. I think responses can be emotional and honestly should be a little emotional. I think it should touch our hearts in a way that our emotional connection to God is affected, to where it goes back to why our heart desires what our heart desires. And it goes back to if God is calling us to these certain purposes, and the reason we want to do it is because our heart is so full, our heart is so touched by who God is and our relationship with Him. I mean, there should be a little emotion in that. I mean, I have feelings and emotion to my relationship with God, and the reason I want to, I think me wanting to please Him is an emotion in a little bit, right? So I think you got a point there. Do you have something else?
It was just going to be that one doesn't exclude the other.
It doesn't. No, they work together.
Right.
Yeah, Emily.
I think another thing that we can learn from this passage is looking deeper than just the rule that God gave us. So God told them to sacrifice animals.
Yeah.
So Saul said, free animals to sacrifice is sweet.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the purpose for a sacrifice.
Yeah.
The purpose of a sacrifice wasn't just give him the excess that you just got for free. The point of the sacrifice was to give him your best.
Yeah.
What you have and what yours is the best.
Yep.
And so that, and it talks later in that verse that pre-assumption is as iniquity and idolatry. And so Saul assumed God would sacrifice, here's free animals, sweet, no one has to lose. But if you look deeper as to why God's telling you what to give and what to do, you can learn the heart of God a little better, which will help you serve.
Yeah, and I relate that back to my life, to be honest with you guys. Growing up and through education and stuff, I always just wanted to know the bare minimum to get by. I wanted to know just enough to, pass the class or whatever in that sense, and because I didn't have to put as much effort in. And I was the type of person who I didn't have to, I could figure it out pretty easily to get by and pass classes and whatever. But the point that was just said is don't just leave it at that. Always figure out, always want to understand God's true intent. Always want to keep continuing to educate yourself and learn about the true intent why God has us do what He has us do. Like she said from this passage, Saul's like, oh yeah, free lambs to sacrifice, right? But it's not just for the animals, and it's not about the animals, it's about the intent of why you would sacrifice, right? It's the intent on the relationship you have with God and why you would do that for Him and not just for the animals themselves. I think that's a good point. Andrew?
So, I harbor a lot of animosity in my own mind toward an obedience message.
Okay.
And that's something that I'm kind of been wrestling with because it's difficult for me to think about obedience because I think especially now we've tied obedience so much to this high control and controlling everything we do mentality, and we want to balk at that and we want to rebel against, I'm not, you can't control me. But just thinking back on even my short past with hearing these kind of lessons, obedience to me sounds like it always gets tied a lot more clearly, it gets a lot more explicitly tied to doctrinal things.
Okay.
Commands of God, really. I mean, you hear an obedience lesson right on the heels of a singing without instruments and music lesson. Right?
Yeah.
You'll hear obedience tied to giving on the first day of the week. And even this, this First Samuel passage gets used as, well, you did it, but you didn't do it the right way. You didn't do it exactly the right way. So sorry, that's not obedience. And I'm not trying to negate that, yeah, that's what Samuel is kind of saying to Saul here.
Yeah.
But what I don't remember hearing is love your neighbor, and then that being tied to that is obedience. Like, you need to obey, love your neighbor. You need to obey, love the sojourner or the foreigner who is in your country. Like, those are commands of God too, but we don't hear these strict obedience lessons tied to those more general commands.
Yeah.
And I'm trying, and why is that? Why do we tie obedience to the details, and we don't tie the same significance of obedience to the real traits that God is trying to get us to mirror that it is?
Yeah. I really appreciate that comment because it's a perspective that I relate to but didn't think about. To where, man, like, because I think the way I view it is sometimes we view obedience as a scary thing. In the terms of when you think obey, it's like, okay, I got to obey my parents, but I don't want to do what, I never want to do what they say. I always want to do what I want to do. It more comes, I'm selfish and I always want to do what I want to do. And whatever my parents say is dumb and all that kind of stuff, to where it's not, that's not what it's supposed to be. And it's not the same with God, to where, oh, I don't want to do what he says because he's, I don't like people telling me what to do. And, kind of what Andrew was saying. Alicia, I want to hear your thoughts.
I was gonna say, I think the reason we don't tie the concepts from the Bible and the attitudes the same way that we do the actions is because it's easy to look and see if you've done the check mark and done the action.
Yeah.
It's hard to see if you have the right attitude.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why those lessons are all focused on the things we do
Yeah.
and not who
Okay.
we are.
Yeah. I like that response. Because it is easy. You go back, okay, yeah, I didn't do that. And you're like, okay, I'm good. It makes you feel a little bit better about yourself. To where when you truly go back and analyze it, we might expose ourselves a little bit more, but for the betterment of ourselves, understanding, once again, Joy mentioned it earlier, God's grace plays an effect that we'll be okay, but if we truly look into it, it takes a lot more work and effort, but it really strengthens our connection with him. And it really strengthens our minds to understand that we obey because we want to. Turns back to that. Alicia?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where Saul got lost. Like Emily was saying, he did the thing God told him to do. And like Andrew was saying, that people use this as an example of, well, I did the thing, but you didn't do it the right way.
Yeah.
And so much of worship to God and their relationship with God is heart.
Yeah.
And you can't check mark heart.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the legalities of the church we've leaned so far into legality and check marks
Yep.
and doing things the correct way because we're so scared of analyzing the heart, and it's so hard to judge other people's heart, and so it's easier
It is.
just to say they came to church on Sunday morning and they got their check mark.
And it's not for us to judge other people's hearts. But I think that's a great response. Someone quote that, Alicia 2026, you can't check mark hearts. Because I really like that. But I think it's very valid. And I wanted to get into this a little bit because a lot of our traditions and all of that stuff can really, a lot of times when we think of obedience, okay, we meet and we do these and we check our boxes and it's our traditions and we do it because we have to. This is the way that God wanted to. But this is not the focus of that. It's not what it's supposed to be. It's a lot more than that. It's what Alicia's saying, what Andrew's stemming to, and what this conversation is stemmed from our hearts and what that looks like. Emily?
The interesting thing is if you step back and focus first on, they asked Jesus, what's the most important rule? And it's love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And if you take a step back and focus on obeying those two rules, most everything else will fall into place.
I think so.
And we talk about all of the things that go wrong in the world and all of the things that people are trying to make legal and illegal and all of the conflict. And if you just boil it down to love the Lord your God and love others, the world's going to be a better place 10 times over. And so by focusing on the feelings of being a Christian and the mindset of being a Christian, the other things are going to fall in place because you're loving the Lord the best that you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Aaron, did you have something?
I was kind of thinking about this. It's hard to evangelize obedience.
Okay.
Because, if you talk to Angie, when she first came to church 30-some years ago, she came on a Wednesday night. And she said, and was like, this is the dumbest, boringest thing I've ever been a part of. I can't wait to get out of here and never come back.
Yeah.
And that obedience is very standoffish. And so if you lead with, love and help people understand that, like Emily said, the two commandments, when they asked what was the greatest commandments, Jesus didn't say, show up, tithe, do this, do that. He didn't have the check marks.
Yeah.
He said, love the Lord your God.
Yep.
And everything else will fall in line. So when you look at worship through obedience is, more, it's a meat side of serving God.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. And I think that's the outline of how we actually do teach obedience, because once again, an audience is going to respond differently, because I would probably respond the same way. And I understand that response of, if you have someone up here just grilling you on different things and saying, if you're not like this, if you're not like this, if you're not like this, you're wrong. I mean, you have no reason to be here, because if you're not going to commit yourself to that, you should get out of, all that kind of, or if you hear something that's like, hey, it all plays from our hearts. It's our love. This is why we love God. This is why we trust God, because God has done this for us. And all those types of things. There's really, I think, a response. I mean, how do I want to phrase that? The response is easier when it's heartfelt. Aaron?
One of the things that I've heard in the church is, if someone wants to get baptized, I want to grill you, and the comment is, do you know the cost?
Right.
And because if you don't know the cost, then you're not ready. And the question needs to be, do you love God and want to grow? Do you want to serve God and love God and really grow and develop in an amazing life?
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, then we'll work the other stuff out.
Yep.
Because obedience, while it is important, it doesn't have to you have to know everything to do it. You just have to back to, what is the greatest commandment? If you love God, let's go.
Yeah.
We'll figure the rest out as
Right.
we travel.
And I think that's the right response, because at that point, and once again, it spurs back to what Alicia was talking about. It's not for us to judge other people's hearts. It's not for us to judge other people's relationship with God. When you're ready to follow God, that's a decision between you and God. And we're just here to help you whenever, in any way you need. And that's the same with the obedience to Him, that it's not for me. I'm not standing up here to grill you on things. I don't want you to obey me. I don't want to be up here and say, obey what I say, because all these important things. It's truly about our relationship with God. Ashley, then Joy.
And taking some things that Alicia said and some things that Andrew said, matters of the heart are hard. They're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And, the things like love your neighbor, and the man who asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? When you think of that question, think of almost like parentheses in there being like, please don't let it be blank.
Yeah.
And so whoever it is that you've got in your mind that please don't let this be the definition of who my neighbor is, yes, that's exactly who it is.
Yeah.
And, that's exactly who you need to be loving and accepting and everything.
Absolutely. And I think that's stirring back to what somebody said. So many people have talked. It's been fantastic. But we mentioned the idea that we tend to don't want to talk about the hard things, and we tend to stir away from the hard things. And the reason why we block our relationship with God from the hard things is just this is what I think I know, and it's easy, and let's just check these. It's hard, but when you embrace the hard things and when you trust God through the hard things, it's actually not that hard. It gets easier. It gets easier to trust Him. It gets easier to allow His love to embrace you, and easier for you to reciprocate that love back to Him. Joy?
Well, I think that for me, the key is that word that you're using, relationship.
Yeah.
And so I looked it up real quick, and it says one's feelings or behavior towards something that one deals with regularly, which, automatically makes me think about, marriage, husband and wife.
Right.
There's a relationship between them. It's not that each of them goes along, completely just doing the laundry and doing the next thing. It has a relationship. So if we understand it in marriage, then that helps us to understand what God wants with us is a relationship.
It is.
Not soldiers. I mean, I know He said He uses soldiers,
Yes,
He
but
uses robots.
yeah, and fair enough. But yeah, I mean, I think that's once again, it all stems from relationship, and it goes back to that second lesson on who do we worship? Do we know who we worship? And the point of that was, you need a relationship with God. And once again, that's not for we can share in our relationships with God, but it's not for me to tell you how your relationship with God needs to be on a personal level. And it's not for you to tell me how my relationship with God should be on a personal level. Now, we can help each other with that, and we can share with that, but our relationship with God is number one, us and Him. And then we share in that as a family. That's kind of the way I view it. But Joy's right. I mean, it's all about, yeah, I don't know if we could stress that enough. Joy?
And he defines.
He does. Oh, yeah.
What a relationship with him is.
Yeah.
By example.
Yeah, absolutely. Try to figure out with 2 minutes left where I want to go with this. Which, I mean, we've hit, like John talks about love. John 14 passage talks a lot about love, and we've hit that pretty hard. And then in James, go ahead and turn over to James chapter 1. We'll end on that. I kind of want to recap everything we just said because it's been really good stuff. But James chapter 1, 22 through 25 says, "But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, will be blessed in his doing." Basically, this passage is showing us, hey, you need to, it's real easy for stuff to, information to go in one ear, out the other, us forget about it. But we cannot forget what God has said to us. And then going off of that, there's action. And we've talked about action. But the heart and the purpose behind the action is the most important part. Ashley, did you have something to say?
Yeah, just real quick. Guys, talking about living out the message, and if someone only hears it, or only memorizes it, or only quotes it, but doesn't apply it, like,
Yep.
you're just deceiving yourself. You're definitely not deceiving God, and probably not deceiving your brethren.
Yep. Quote that too, living out the message. I mean, that's exactly what it is. If we take in the information, if we take in the relationship that God has set for us, it's not just something to sit in our brains or sit in the back that we have to use whenever. It's living out the message. And living means every aspect of our lives. So, man, I appreciate all the comments today and the conversations. I think we had a great conversations on what it looks like to worship through obedience. I'm glad we hit the ideas of checklists and those kinds of things because it's important for us to realize that it's more than just this, and this. It's actually more intent to our heart and our relationships with God and all that good stuff. So we'll go to the backside on Wednesday. And, yeah, I appreciate everybody's attention today.